At 11:47 p.m., 13 hours before my wedding, I got a text from a stranger. Your fiancé has another wife. Check Instagram at Michael_Santos_PDX. What I found destroyed everything. Photos of my fiancé Michael with another woman at the exact restaurant where he proposed to me. She was wearing the same vintage ring he'd given me. Same story about it being his grandmother's heirloom. But that was just the beginning. By morning, I'd discovered Michael Santos wasn't even his real name. He had 5 different fiancées across 3 states. He'd stolen $47,000 from our wedding fund and was planning to disappear the day of our ceremony, leaving me standing at the altar with nothing. The FBI found recordings of our most intimate conversations on his computer. He'd been studying us like lab rats, perfecting his manipulation techniques. This is the story of how the perfect man turned out to be a federal criminal, and how 200 wedding guests watched me expose him instead of saying, "I do." 6 months earlier, everyone thought I had the perfect life. I was 28, working as a marketing director in Portland, and engaged to Michael Santos, the kind of man other women would stop and stare at on the street. Michael wasn't just gorgeous, he made me feel like the only person in the room. He remembered every detail about my work projects, showed up with my favorite coffee just because, and would introduce me as my incredible fiancée Jessica with genuine pride. "How did you get so lucky?" my friend Sarah would ask. Seriously, he's like a Pinterest board come to life. The proposal was perfect, sunset in Santorini, a vintage ring that showed he'd remembered my preferences from months earlier. He'd always remembered everything. "Best friends forever," he whispered as we fell asleep that night. "Nothing will ever change that." Looking back, I wonder if he was already lying then. There were signs I rationalized away. His phone was always face down. He'd started taking it to the bathroom. His laptop was suddenly always closed when he stepped away. "Gotta stay informed," he'd say when I joked about the bathroom phone habit. "Construction contracts have proprietary stuff," he'd explain about the laptop secrecy. The work trips became more frequent too, but Michael always had logical explanations and brought me thoughtful gifts from each city. His bachelor party weekend in Vegas seemed perfectly normal. He sent me photos throughout, the guys at dinner, hungover breakfast shots, him in a ridiculous Santos's Last Stand t-shirt. "Having fun but missing my bride," he texted with a group selfie. What I didn't know was that while sending me those photos, he was posting different ones to an Instagram account I'd never seen. The night before our wedding was supposed to be magical. I'd spent the evening with my bridesmaids, painting our nails, drinking champagne, going over the timeline. Everything was perfect. At 11:47 p.m., after everyone left, I got that text from the unknown number. My hands shook as I searched for it Michael Santos_PDX. The account that came up had Michael's face, but photos I'd never seen. There were dozens of images going back months. Michael with a beautiful brunette woman, holding hands, kissing, looking at each other the way we looked at each other. Weekend getaways, restaurant dates, what looked like her birthday party. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. The most recent photo was from 3 days ago. Michael and this woman at a waterfront restaurant, clearly not Vegas. She was wearing a ring on her left hand. But that wasn't the worst part. In the background of the photo, I could see a receipt on their table. The restaurant name was clearly visible. Serafina's, the same place where Michael had proposed to me. He'd taken her to our special place and proposed with what looked like an identical ring. But when I zoomed in on the receipt, I could see something that made me physically sick. He'd ordered the exact same meal we'd shared on our proposal night, the seafood risotto and champagne that he'd claimed was perfect for celebrating our unique love. The captions destroyed me. 6 months with this incredible woman. She said yes at Serafina's, with her showing off an engagement ring that looked suspiciously similar to mine. Can't wait to start our lives together. He even remembered that. Seafood risotto is my favorite, just like his grandmother's recipe. His grandmother's recipe. The same lie he'd told me about why that dish was so meaningful to him. I kept scrolling, and my world collapsed further. There was a photo of them at Powell's Books, in the exact same aisle where we'd done our engagement photos, with her holding the same book of poetry that Michael had said reminded him of me. Another of them hiking Powell Butte, where Michael and I had our first official date, and she was wearing hiking boots identical to the ones he'd bought me, claiming he'd never seen boots that perfect before. He wasn't just living a double life. He was running our entire relationship like a rehearsed play, complete with props, scripts, and predetermined romantic locations, even down to the specific meals and gifts that I'd thought were chosen specially for me. Then I saw something that made me physically sick. A photo from Valentine's Day, the same day Michael had given me those silk pajamas and told me I was the only woman he'd ever love. In this photo, Claire was wearing a necklace I recognized. A vintage gold locket that Michael had given me for Christmas, claiming it was a family heirloom from his grandmother. I screenshot everything with trembling fingers, my wedding dress hanging behind me like a ghost of the future I'd thought I was going to have. But the absolute worst discovery was yet to come. As I scrolled to the very beginning of the account, I found a photo that stopped my heart. It was Michael with Claire at a restaurant, but in the background, you could see a woman with a little boy. The woman looked familiar, and when I zoomed in, I realized why. It was the same woman from a photo on Michael's nightstand, a picture he'd told me was his deceased sister with her son. The woman who was supposedly dead was very much alive, sitting 3 tables away from Michael's romantic dinner with his other fiancé. I called the number that had texted me with shaking hands. Claire Martinez, 26, a graphic designer who'd met Michael 8 months ago at a coffee shop. He said he was recently divorced and taking things slow, she told me through tears. He seemed so honest, so genuine. But as Claire told me her story, the details became increasingly horrifying. Wait, I interrupted her. Did he ever take you to a cabin in Mount Hood for a romantic weekend? Yes, she said, surprised. How did you know? He said it was his family's cabin, that his grandfather built it in the 1960s, and that he'd never taken anyone else there because it was too special. My stomach dropped. That was the same cabin where Michael had taken me for our 6-month anniversary. The same story about his grandfather, the same claim about never bringing anyone else there. Claire, I said slowly, I need you to describe something for me. When you were at that cabin, was there a wooden carving of an eagle above the fireplace? Oh my God, yes. He told me his grandfather carved it as a symbol of their family's strength. How do you... She stopped mid-sentence and I could hear her sharp intake of breath. He took you there too, didn't he? Not just there, I said, feeling sick. Claire, I think he's been recycling our entire relationship with you. Did he ever make you breakfast in bed with heart-shaped pancakes? Yes, she whispered. On my birthday. He said it was a tradition his mother taught him. Did he give you a vintage necklace and tell you it belonged to his grandmother? The gold locket, she said, her voice breaking. He said she wore it on her wedding day. Every romantic gesture, every meaningful story, every unique tradition he'd shared with me had been copy-pasted into his relationship with Claire. We weren't his girlfriends. We were performances of the same scripted role. That's when Claire told me something that made everything so much worse. Jessica, there's something else. When I confronted him tonight about the Facebook post, he didn't just confess about you. He started crying and said there was someone else he needed to tell me about. Another woman. My blood went cold. Another woman. He said her name was Amanda, that she was his ex-wife, but that things had gotten complicated again recently. He said he'd been trying to figure out how to handle the situation, but it had gotten out of control. A third woman. Michael wasn't just living a double life, he was living a triple life. Claire, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, I think we need to find Amanda. But Claire's next words stopped me cold. Jessica, he said Amanda had a son, a little boy who thinks Michael is his father. The woman in the restaurant photo, the deceased sister, Michael had a child. At 8 a.m., as I was supposed to be getting ready, Michael showed up at my door looking like he hadn't slept. But I was ready for him. I can explain everything, he said. Really? I said, pulling out my phone. Can you explain this? I showed him the screenshot of him and Claire at our proposal spot. His face went white. Can you explain why you told Claire that your sister was dead when she's obviously alive and sitting 3 tables away from your romantic dinner? Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. For the first time in our 4-year relationship, he had no smooth explanation ready. Jessica, please, let you what? Lie some more? Because I know about Amanda too. The colour drained completely from his face. How do you know about Amanda? Claire told me, your other fiancé. The one you somehow forgot to mention when you were confessing about your complicated situation. Michael slumped against the doorframe, and for a moment I thought he might actually faint. "There's a child, isn't there?" I pressed. "That little boy in the restaurant photo, that's your son." "Jessica, it's complicated." "No, Michael, it's not complicated, it's criminal. You've been defrauding multiple women, stealing money from our joint wedding account to fund your other relationships, and lying about having a child." That hit home. Michael's eyes widened. "How did you know about the money?" I hadn't known about the money. I'd been guessing. But his reaction told me everything. "You've been stealing from our wedding fund to pay for dates with other women?" My voice was rising now, and I didn't care if the neighbors heard. "It wasn't stealing," he said desperately. "It was our money, and I was going to pay it back. Our money that you were spending on other fiancés. Michael, do you understand that what you've done isn't just cheating? You've committed fraud, identity theft, emotional abuse." That's when Michael said something that chilled me to the bone. "You can't prove any of that." The mask had finally slipped completely. This wasn't the remorseful man who'd made mistakes. This was someone calculating his legal exposure. "Actually," I said, "I can. I screenshot everything. Claire and I have been comparing notes. And we're going to find Amanda." For the first time in our entire relationship, Michael looked genuinely afraid. 3 weeks later, Claire and I had done the detective work Michael never expected us to do. We'd found Amanda Foster on Facebook, and what we discovered was beyond anything we'd imagined. Amanda wasn't just Michael's ex-wife. She was his current wife. They'd never actually divorced. The separation Michael had told Claire about was a lie. According to Amanda's posts, they'd been working on their marriage in counseling, and she thought they were making progress. We met Amanda at a park where her 6-year-old son Logan was at soccer practice. She was pretty, tired-looking, and devastatingly familiar with Michael's pattern. But Amanda's story was worse than we'd expected. "This is the 4th time I've caught him," she said, watching Logan run across the field. "But this time is different. He's not just cheating, he's been forging my signature on documents." "What kind of documents?" Claire asked. "Loan applications. He's been taking out credit cards in my name to fund his other relationships. I found out last week that he's racked up $47,000 in debt that I'm legally responsible for." My stomach dropped. "Amanda, there's something you need to know. Michael took money from our joint wedding account. Thousands of dollars." Amanda's face crumpled. "He told me that money was from a construction project bonus. He used it to pay Logan's school tuition." The three of us sat in stunned silence as the full scope of Michael's crimes became clear. He wasn't just a serial cheater. He was a financial predator who'd been systematically defrauding all of us. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "Jessica," Amanda said, looking at me with a mixture of pity and anger, "Michael never intended to marry you. The venue you booked? He never paid the final payment. The photographer, the caterer, the band, he cancelled all of them 2 weeks ago and pocketed the deposits." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean he cancelled them?" "The private investigator has documentation. Michael was planning to disappear the day before your wedding with all the money you'd both put into the joint account. He was going to leave you standing at the altar with nothing, not even vendors to explain what happened." The man I'd been planning to marry hadn't just been living multiple lives. He'd been planning to destroy mine completely and vanish like I never existed. That conversation was devastating but liberating. I realized I hadn't lost the love of my life. I'd discovered the love of my life had never existed. Amanda decided to proceed with divorce. Claire and I became unlikely friends, bonded by shared experience and helping each other heal. 6 months later, I felt like myself again. I'd gotten promoted, deepened real friendships, started hiking, took pottery classes, traveled solo to Ireland. I was no longer trying to be the person I thought Michael wanted. I was just myself. "You seem lighter," my sister Emma observed. "I feel like myself again," I said. A year later, I thought I'd heard the last of Michael Santos. I was wrong. I got a message from Rebecca Kim, who'd found my name in Michael's old emails. But this time, the story had a terrifying new element. "I know this sounds crazy," Rebecca wrote, "but I think my fiancé might be your ex. But here's the thing. He told me you died in a car accident. He said he was so traumatized by losing his fiancé that he couldn't date for 2 years. My blood turned to ice. Michael was telling women I was dead. When I called Rebecca, her story got worse. He showed me news articles about a car accident, she said. There were photos of a woman who looked similar to you, and he said it was you. He even had a memorial service program with your name on it. Michael had created fake evidence of my death to explain our relationship history to new victims. Rebecca, I said carefully, I need you to look up Amanda Foster on Facebook. She's his actual wife. They were never divorced. That's impossible, Rebecca said. He showed me their divorce papers. He forged them. He's been forging legal documents for years. But the most chilling detail was yet to come. Jessica, Rebecca said, her voice shaking, there's something else. Michael told me he had a daughter who died in the same car accident as his fiancé. He showed me pictures of a little girl and said she was his daughter Emma, that she was in the car with you when you died. He said he couldn't bear to talk about her most days because the grief was too overwhelming. I felt sick. Rebecca, that's not his daughter. Those are pictures of my niece Emma from my Facebook account. He's using my family's photos to create fake tragedies. But he knew so many details, Rebecca protested. He told me Emma loved butterflies, that her favorite color was purple, that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. He even showed me a drawing she'd made of the two of them together. My hands started shaking. Those were all real details about my niece, details I'd shared with Michael during family dinners and holidays. He'd been collecting information about my loved ones to use in his fictional sob stories. The drawing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Was it a crayon picture of a man and a little girl holding hands in front of a house? Yes. How could you possibly know that? Because Emma drew that for me last Christmas. She gave it to me, and I posted it on Instagram. Michael stole it and told you she drew it for him. The scope of Michael's psychological manipulation was beyond anything we'd imagined. He wasn't just lying about relationships. He was creating elaborate fictional tragedies using real people's lives, stealing our most precious memories and relationships to gain sympathy and trust from new victims. How many other women has he told I'm dead? I asked Rebecca. I don't know, she whispered. But Jessica, I think we need to call the police. This isn't just cheating anymore. This is identity theft, fraud, and emotional terrorism. That's when I realized Michael Santos wasn't just a serial cheater. He was a predator who used fake deaths and tragedies to manipulate vulnerable women into relationships. And somewhere out there, he was probably telling his current victim that Rebecca had tragically died, showing her fake funeral programs and stolen family photos while he planned his next elaborate deception. 3 years later, Michael Santos is in federal prison. The investigation that started with Rebecca's call uncovered a nationwide fraud scheme. Michael had been operating in multiple states, using fake identities, forged documents, and elaborate backstories to defraud women out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The FBI found evidence of at least 12 victims across 5 states. Some women had lost their entire savings. Others, like Amanda, were left with crushing debt from loans taken out in their names. One woman in Seattle had mortgaged her house to pay for Michael's fake cancer treatment, but the psychological damage was worse than the financial loss. Michael had convinced multiple women that their previous partners or family members had died in tragic accidents, using their grief to create deeper emotional bonds. He'd stolen photos from social media to create fake memorial services and funeral programs. The woman I'd thought I was going to marry was a professional con artist whose real name wasn't even Michael Santos. During the trial, I learned his actual name was Marcus Williams, and he'd been running similar schemes since college. The construction business was fake, a front created with stolen licenses and fabricated references. The family stories, the childhood memories, even his supposed hometown, all carefully crafted lies designed to create trust and intimacy. But the most sickening revelation came during his cross-examination. Marcus's defense attorney revealed that he'd been recording intimate conversations with all his victims, not for blackmail, but as a performance review to perfect his manipulation techniques. He would listen to recordings of himself with previous victims, the prosecutor explained, studying which lines got the best emotional responses, which stories made women trust him fastest, which vulnerabilities he could exploit most effectively. He kept detailed spreadsheets rating his own performance on dates, tracking which gifts received the strongest reactions, and noting which personal tragedies from his victims' lives he could repurpose for future relationships. The FBI found hours of audio files on his encrypted drives, including recordings of our most private moments together, conversations where I'd shared my deepest fears and dreams, thinking I was opening my heart to the man I loved. Instead, I was providing market research for him to perfect his predatory techniques on his next victim. He had files on each woman, the FBI agent explained, documenting their insecurities, their family dynamics, their relationship histories. He would study these profiles before each interaction, like an actor preparing for a role. He even had notes about which tears were most convincing and which facial expressions created the strongest emotional impact. I learned that the night he spontaneously showed up at my apartment with soup when I was sick, he'd been practicing that exact scenario with voice recordings for weeks, perfecting the tone of concern in his voice and timing his arrival for maximum emotional impact. He studies his victims, the FBI agent told us during the investigation. He learns what they want to hear, what their vulnerabilities are, and then he becomes the perfect man for each individual woman. I testified at his sentencing hearing, along with 7 other victims. The judge called it one of the most elaborate and psychologically cruel fraud schemes she'd ever seen. Marcus, I can't think of him as Michael anymore, was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. Money none of us will ever see. But here's what I want every woman to know. I'm grateful it all fell apart when it did. The woman who was planning to marry Michael Santos was living in a fantasy, thinking love meant never having doubts or asking hard questions. The woman I am now knows that real love is built on truth, transparency, and the courage to be vulnerable with someone who actually exists. I'm in a healthy relationship now with David, who is everything Marcus pretended to be, honest about his flaws, transparent about his past, real in ways that sometimes aren't pretty but are always genuine. Sometimes I drive past the venue where my wedding was supposed to happen, and I smile. The worst thing that ever happened to me was also the thing that saved my life. Because if Marcus hadn't been caught, if I'd actually married him, I might have ended up like some of his other victims, financially destroyed, emotionally shattered, and completely isolated from the people who actually loved me. Instead, I learned that the most dangerous predators are the ones who seem too good to be true. And sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is having your fairy tale destroyed before you realize it was actually a nightmare.